Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Introspection, Grief to Growth. I'm your host, Amy Lindner Lesser. And today I have a really fascinating guest, another co author from the Grief Experience book that I was co author of this past spring, I think it was. My guest is Kirby K. Clark, who has been acquainted with death and grieving since a very young age. And her story is fascinating because while many of us may have been acquainted with grief and death, we don't make the same choices that she did as far as her career. And she knew at a relatively young age that her life was leading her to helping people who are grieving in different ways. Kirby K is a funeral director. She did her studies in Kansas and spent more than 10 years doing that. Then she got a bachelor's in business administration. I'm not sure if she was thinking that she would do that in a funeral home, but we'll have to find out. And then she moved to Albany, New York, capital area, and got a master's in clinical counseling from the College of St. Rose. While she was doing that, she started and led a grief and loss support group with American Cancer Society and worked as a bereavement coordinator. Now she is working full-time as a mother of twins who I believe just turned 3, as well as doing counseling for an agency or two. So help me welcome Kirby K to Introspection. Welcome to Introspection, the podcast about moving from grief to growth. I'm Amy Lindner Lesser, your host. Introspection started out as a podcast about hospitality, innkeeping, and innkeepers. After about a year, I realized that my life and interests have morphed from hospitality to helping others navigate from grief and loss to growth and living. In this new version of Introspection, I will be talking about my personal experiences with loss, and there are quite a few, what I've learned along the way through my professional training, as well as from my coaching experiences. I'll also be bringing in guests to share interesting ideas. So grab a beverage, find a comfy place, take a deep breath, and listen in.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
This is one of my favorite things, is to talk more with the co-authors of our book. So the book has been an amazing success. I think I was surprised by how many people have wanted to read about grief and loss.
Yeah, I was too. I mean, I knew it was probably going to be successful, but for the awards that we have won, to the libraries that we're, setting up events for, to talking to different colleges, I can't believe we're spreading this book across the world. And my biggest thing, the reason why I jumped on this, was just to keep people grief informed and let them know that this is something that we need to talk about, unfortunately, sometimes. And everyone has a story. And so it's a great co-authorship of different stories and grief doesn't have to be just, a loss. It can be a loss of a relationship or a partnership. So I think that's what I think grief needs to be talked about more in schools and just in life.
I think that's a perfect segue. You know, the book is very different from other books out there. It's not a book for professionals necessarily, but professionals, therapists, counselors, coaches can all benefit from it. But it's also written for the layperson. and there are 25 stories. So each of the authors has shared their own personal experience or one of their personal experiences with death and grieving, as well as a tool so that you can try the tools out and see which one fits you.
Right.
Why don't we start with sort of summarizing your story?
Okay. All right. So from a young age, I was raised by my grandparents, and they took respecting their loved ones to heart. They thought it was very important that we go to people's funeral services, we go to their visitations. So I remember at a young age, they were going to be taking, they would take me out of school and we would go to the funeral home and we would pay our respects. So I remember my first service was at 5 years old, and it just kind of progressed from there. By age 11, my parents were very young when I was born, and my great grandmother had passed away, and then my grandpa had passed away in the same week. So initially, my grandmother from my mom's side, she lost her mother and then she lost her husband. And I wasn't shunned away from the decisions. I was in the arrangement room with my grandmother at 11, and I just watched the funeral director take my grandmother's hand and just tell her that it was going to be okay and they were going to honor both my great grandmother and then my grandpa. And honestly, she was wonderful. Her name was Carol, and I just thought, wow, I don't know. I probably thought she was God in some sense, or like an angel sent from above, because she really helped. My grandma was, as you can imagine, she was a mess. And she was heartbroken because she lost two significant people in a short amount of time. And she was young. She was 50 when that happened. So all these things, come about during that time. So right then and there, I thought to myself, if there's something that I want to do with my life, I want to be like Carol. I want to be able to take somebody's hand and say, oh, it's going to be okay, and I can help you and guide you, because that's exactly what she did. So then we kind of fast forward. I went through, high school. I did an internship at the local funeral home in the summer, just to kind of see if that was kind of what I wanted to do, to go to mortuary school. And I got scared, I think, a little bit. And I didn't go. I went first for education. I got into my second education class, and I was like, what am I doing? I don't want to be a teacher. I've known for a long time what I wanted to do. And I quit. And I applied to mortuary school and just started going to mortuary school in Kansas City, Kansas. And I graduated December of 2009. And I worked at local funeral home there close to Kansas City, and lived in the basement of the funeral home. And I did night calls. I worked visitations, sat in the helped funeral directors with arrangements. I did everything. Helped with embalming. So I worked at Warren McElwain Mortuary in Lawrence, Kansas, and Larry McElwain was the owner, and he took me under his wing and kind of molded me. And then that kind of shaped me. I, graduated, went on to my internship, and had a great career, over 10 years doing that. Worked at several different funeral homes, from family owned to corporate.
When you were talking about being at your first funeral at 5, I thought how much of a gift that was. I was raised so completely different. My grandfather, my mother's father, died when I was 6, and nobody told me. They didn't want the child to hear about that. And I think many families in this country shelter children from the realities because even as adults, we are taught to, grieve privately, don't cry. You're strong, you can do it. They want you to carry on. They're in a better place. All of these ridiculous notions, which all they do is serve to make grieving um, like unusual instead of this is life. Everybody grieves. You are not going to get out of this world without having experienced at least one loss. You're lucky if it's not many more, but everybody is going to have a loss. So that was a wonderful gift that you were given to be able to see that death is part of life.
Yeah, we'd even talked about it. It was just it was just conversations that we had. Like I remember asking my grandma right after my grandpa died, like, where is he going and why do people die and that sort of thing, and what happens at the funeral home. I remember like it was yesterday. And I remember at 5 years old I remember the color of the casket. I remember like the flowers, and they say that young children sometimes don't remember stuff like that, but I do. I definitely do. And it was a huge impact. Like I just remember I was mesmerized with what they all do to get it to look so magical and so just honorable, so that their loved one can mourn, can have that last moment, and the deceased can be honored for their life. Of course, I didn't think that at 11, but as I got older, I was like, wow, this is really impactful work that you do. So, yeah, 2013, I met my husband. We met in Wichita, Kansas, and I was working as a funeral director, and I was actually working at a family owned, and I was getting trained by the owner. And my whole goal, because during that time also, I was graduating with my bachelor's. So, what I wanted to do was own my own. That was like my ultimate goal before I met my husband.
That explains the business administration. Okay.
Yeah. Everyone was like, why are you here? You have a mortuary degree. Why are you in business school? I'm like, well, if I'm going to own a funeral home, probably need to know how to run one. So that's why I went back and got a bachelor's degree. So anyway, I met him. I graduated of May 2013, and I met him in June of 2013. And within probably six to 8 months, I knew that we would probably get married and, move around. And he's a pilot for the Air Force, and he's also a commercial airline pilot as well. And so he's gone a lot. When we first started dating, he was gone, a couple months at a time, and then he'd be home for a couple months. And that was just kind of the rotation. So I thought to myself, and as a funeral director at that point, I was working between 45 and 60 hours a week because I was on call a lot, and I loved my work. I honestly, it was the best decision I ever made. But then I really had to sit down with myself and just think, what do you want more? Do you want a career, or do you want a family? Because if you want a family, two successful people can't, I could hire a nanny and all of that. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me and for my husband, I wanted to be, around them as they grew up. So I didn't want to be called out when it was soccer practice or dance recital or whatever. And neither did he. So we decided that I would try the counseling aspect, because I was thinking, what can I do still, but it has to be grief. Like that's my calling, and I know that God has given me that gift. So I need to use that to help out in the world and be like Carol, and take people by the hand and walk in their grief journey. So that's what I did when we moved here in 2015, because my husband got transferred here from Kansas. I went back to school and got my master's degree at St. Rose. So I have a master's in mental health counseling. And I worked up until at a private practice in Malta, up until I had my twins. Actually, I was still working the day before they were born, because that's just how passionate I am about helping people in the grief realm. So, I have every intention to always, keep my funeral director's license current, to maybe tap back into that realm later in life. But right now, God has called me, I feel like, to just be a counselor as much as I can be, and still be a mom. So that's kind of my story, and how I wear so many hats.
And the twins are now, was I right? Did they just turn 3?
Yeah, I was very impressed that you remembered. Yeah, so they've been 3 a whole, like, 10 days. So, yeah,
Well, they're right in the middle of my 2 granddaughters. I have one who's gonna be 4 and one who just turned 2. Different moms, but so that's how I can remember where they are.
they are 3, and, completely opposite from each other. They could not be more different. I have a little girl and I have a little boy, and, they're wonderful, but they also push the boundaries and the patience, almost daily. But it's a good thing.
I remember while we were in the process of writing the book, I think we were at what the lead author's office, and we were having pictures. Some people were doing pictures, and I remember it like started to pour, and then someone said, "Look, there's a rainbow," which is very significant to you, I understand.
Yeah. So my chapter is chapter 15, and it's called Chasing Rainbows. So my grandparents that I talked about earlier that raised me, both sets of grandparents take, I take, or I want to give full credit to raising me, and a couple of aunts as well. Like, it took a village. It really did. But my grandparents on both sides really did a great job with visitations and sharing time. But my grandparents, my dad's parents, is the one that I lived with. And my grandpa died June of 2015. And I moved here May of 2015. So I was only here 2 weeks and he died. He had been sick for a long time, but he had a massive stroke, and then that was just the end of it.
I don't think being sick and even knowing that death is imminent does a whole lot to soften the blow.
And I had a lot of survivor guilt. I had a lot of guilt because I left, and I thought, if I would have stayed in Kansas, he would have still been there. I wouldn't have, probably the reason why he finally let go was because I left and I was doing, I was living my own life, because I took care of them, as they got older. I took care of them, and I was their advocate for a lot of different things. So anyway, that was hard, and that was really hard. And in May of 2015, as well, as I'm moving here, I got engaged. So it was just a lot. And my grandfather was supposed to walk me down the aisle. Well, then my grandma said after he died, she's like, "Oh, I can walk you down the aisle. I'll come to New York, because we were going to get married here. And I'll come to New York and I'll walk you down the aisle." And so thought everything was going to be peachy keen. And then about 6 months later, she got sick. she started losing her voice, and we thought that she had just like a cold or a sinus infection. Long story short, it turned into be thyroid cancer, and she had an operation, and then the problems just went one after another. It was like the domino effect, and she resulted of cancer had spread all over her body in a short amount of time. And so she got diagnosed on October 2nd, and she was gone January 10th of the following year. So almost 7 months to the day of my grandpa. They were married over 60 years. They did everything together. I found a journal that she had written, and she died of a broken heart. Like, she missed him so much. And so that brought my aunts and I some comfort when we got to read that. So my wedding day, I didn't have my parents, basically, that were my parents were not there. And it was hard. It was, it was a beautiful day. It was everything that I had ever dreamed about, but I never in a million years thought they would not be sitting there. And so we went through the vows. It was a hot July day. It was super hot, no clear blue skies. And we got through our vows, we got through pictures, and we're walking down to the reception hall. And my husband shuts the door, and I'm not even kidding. As soon as he shut the door, the rain just starts pouring down. And we were like happy because, the wise tale is if it rains on your wedding day, that's good luck. So we looked at each other and we were like, oh, we're going to have good luck. So we're trying to enjoy the festivities but the whole day, I just felt like I needed a sign from them that they were there, that they were watching, like that they approve, even though my grandmother gave us her blessing, and my grandpa as well. But I don't know, I just needed something. And a couple minutes later, one of my bridesmaids came over and said, you and Marshall need to go outside. There's something you need to see. By this point, it stopped raining. And over where we got married, there was a double rainbow, and it was huge, probably the biggest I've ever seen.
Wow.
And so that just became our staple, a sign for my family and I, is every time we see a rainbow, it's when we absolutely need it. And it's my grandparents.
It's their message that they're still around. They're still watching over you. I'm curious, do you ever ask them for a sign? Or do the rainbows just appear?
No, I have asked them after my son both of the twins were born, but my son he was pretty hard at the beginning. Just, he wanted to be close all the time. He wanted to be held all the time. And I remember it was one early morning, probably like September of 21. And it had just rained that morning, and I was up with him. I was like, maybe I'll take him outside after the rain had stopped and just try to console him, and I do remember thinking before I went outside, man, I wish my grandmother was here because she would probably know what to do. Like, she would, I don't know, do something different than I'm doing. And I walked out, and again, the hugest rainbow crossed my whole backyard onto the other person's yard, or my neighbor's yard. And I just was like, and then he stopped crying.
He saw the rainbow too.
Yeah. Now they're at the age they see the rainbows, and I tell them that is, your great grandparents, and we talk about them now that they're getting a little older. And as they get older, I'll tell them more stories and show them more pictures and, that sort of thing. But yeah, so that's how I decided my title for the book, is because I knew if I was telling their story, I knew that had to be in there.
And I love that the rainbow appeared as we were all like prepping for this book. It was like they were blessing the book.
Yeah. So yeah, that was amazing when we were taking all those pictures for the book. And Kelly and a couple other of the authors told me to walk outside, and I couldn't believe it that there was a huge rainbow there and I have that shot. But I will also tell you, like, just from working on the book to date, I have seen more rainbows than I have since they've been gone. So for me, I think it's like you're heading in the right direction because there's been a lot of ups and downs, especially being a new mom.
What's the tool that you included in the book?
So I provided journaling as my tool. That's what I used during my grief journey with my grandparents. I actually, on my way to Kansas when my grandfather got sick, I picked up a journal. I had always wanted to be a faithful journal writer, and I would start one. And then by February, I was like done with it. Like I wouldn't continue. But I kind of thought to myself, I'm probably going to really need to write some stuff down. So I picked it up and it was so beautiful. Then I decided I did write a little bit after my grandpa died. But then when my grandma got sick and I had to come back to Kansas to spend with her in her final days, I started writing in it every day. So it has all of her last journeys, like conversations we had, and just things that we talked about, and we just went through it all, and I wrote it all. And I have from the time she got admitted to the hospital till the time she passed. It was so therapeutic. But then after she died, I thought, well, I'm going to continue this and see if it'll help me. So I started writing to them. It was like, I don't know, letters to them, but it was just in a book. And I wrote for a year to them, tell them what's going on with my life, you know, just everything and anything that I would tell them, because I would talk to my grandmother once or twice a day. Like she and I were very close. We were like best friends. And so for me, it was like, I don't know who I can talk to, but I can have this outlet. So in the book, I really tried to give people like prompts of how to start journaling, because some people are like me. It's always your New Year's resolutions and you don't really know how to get started. And lo and behold, there are journals out there that have prompts already printed for you, so you can just fill them in. I found it super helpful, and now I journal for my kids. Now I write to my kids.
I've been journaling for years, not consistently every night, but the one consistent journal that I do is every year, New Year's Eve, I write a letter to my late husband, and I tell him everything that happened during the year. I'm sure I leave a lot of things out, but it's something, I don't go out partying on New Year's Eve. So it's me and the house and my pets. So it's a perfect time to really, it's a review of the year. It's a connection that I still have with him, and it's been 25 years since he passed away. At least once a week, I tell people start to journal. And I recorded another podcast earlier where I talked about resolving or coming to closure with relationships that end by starting with the things that you're really angry about. Write them all down. Write the things that hurt you. Then write the things that were wonderful and the gratitude for that person. And in this case, I'd say don't do it in a journal, but do the writing, because it's better to rip it up, burn it, or flush it. That you don't want to hold on to it, but you want to get it out. And then there are other things that you just, journal your gratitude, because we all know whatever you give your attention to is what grows. So if you focus on being miserable and depressed and angry because somebody died or because a job didn't work out, whatever it was, you're going to just bring more of that into your life. as opposed to, I had a great day, it was sunny, or I watched the bunnies hop and they were funny. Whatever it is, the things to be grateful for, whether they're the tiniest little things like not having to worry about where you're gonna find, water that you can drink, or being warm in the winter, um, especially in the Northeast.
No kidding. No kidding. It's definitely different than Kansas weather, I will tell you that. I was gonna also say, like, for clients that I've counseled in the past, like journaling, if I use that, as a tool, then I also say, like, if you have trouble getting started, then just start with a gratitude journal. So you write down every night before bed, it's right there by your bedside table. You write down 3 things that you're grateful for, that happened that day. And that just helps train your mind to think those positive thoughts in a more bright light. And they can be simple, like somebody paid for my Starbucks order, or didn't I saw the sunshine, like you were saying, or the bunnies, or whatever the case may be. It doesn't have to be these grand events that happen in your life.
The next step that I do with people is, if you're grateful for a person, to take the next step and say why. Why did they do what did they do to make you feel grateful? And that way, because it's easy to say, I'm grateful for sunlight, I'm grateful I woke up, I'm grateful for my kids. And then every day it's the same thing. And I'm like, no, you have to go the next step.
That's a great point. I didn't think about that. Thank you for that. That's great to think about. Yeah.
And as you said, there are a lot of journals out there that do have prompts. And those are, easy ways to start too.
Yeah, it's easy way to start. But I also tell people, pick a journal that's beautiful to you, because you're going to pick it up more than just like a spiral notebook, or, something that is meaningful for you. And I still have mine. I used it several times in my chapter. I quoted from entries that I wrote, so people could see my actual thoughts during that time.
That's a great idea. I still have my husband's that he wrote last 6 months of his life, and I couldn't look at it for probably a year. And then I started reading it, and I was blown away, because the things that he couldn't say to me, he wrote.
Oh,
I didn't know that he appreciated me, because I got all of the brunt of his anger, and I understood that part of it.
yeah.
And I knew it wasn't really directed at me, it was the situation, and he was 48 when he died, so
Oh
he
my
was
goodness.
very young.
Yeah.
I was 42
Yeah.
and 43, and, it wasn't where we were supposed to be, that wasn't supposed to happen,
Right.
and, I was a social worker, so I understood all of that.
Right.
It would have been nice had he said once, "I really appreciate that you've been supportive of me," but he
Mhm.
did write it, and so now I have it forever.
Right.
And my kids read it too, so they saw, and they were 11 and 14 when he died. So for them to read it as older teenagers, I don't think they've read it recently, but even as adults, it helps them see their dad in a different light too.
Now I'm writing to my children, and I hope it brings them some good things about their childhood that they may or may not remember, and just my thoughts about who they are. And I've started this new tradition that I write on their birthday. I write to each of them, and I'm going to give it to them when they're 21, all the letters.
That's lovely.
But the journal, there's only one journal, so they're going to have to they're going to have to share it. I'm not doing two.
You don't need to do 2, you can copy it and, and then have it bound So one kid gets the original and the other kid gets the photocopied one. And the way they do it these days, it could look like writing too.
So, yeah, that's kind of how journaling helped me through my grief journey with my grandparents and beyond. I mean, I continue to just this past week I started using my own medicine of writing things down that I'm grateful for, and also writing down things that I want to try to achieve every day. And when you're in the grief journey, sometimes lists like that, just simple lists, help you focus because you're such in a fog. I'm finding that motherhood has a lot of significance when it is a lot like grief when you're going through the grief journey. You got mom fog, you got grief fog, like, so you got to write things down.
I've told many a woman that just because you're happy that you were able to get pregnant and you had children doesn't mean you're not grieving. We grieve for happy things too, because when you have children, you realize, especially once they start toddling around, you realize you're never going to go to the bathroom alone. You're never going to have that same relationship with your partner that you had before you had children. It doesn't mean it's worse. It's just different, and we grieve for the familiarity of it. So, and yes, being a parent, being a new parent definitely is fog, especially when you're trying to be a sort of single parent because your spouse is at work a lot and away, when you're dealing with toddlers who are, so energetic and if you take your eyes off them for a second, they could be on top of the refrigerator and trying to do everything else, without making it rote.
Hmm.
But you're putting one foot in front of the other, which is what we do when we first start to grieve, is we just try to make it through the day. Our time has come to an end, and thank you for sharing your personal experiences. Hopefully, you can inspire some other little girls who might hear this with the idea of a different career path, because it certainly is different. Unfortunately, most of us in this society are raised to be afraid of death. And so to say that, death is normal, it happens, and what a wonderful career to be able to help families go through such a difficult period where they're grieving over loss, and to make them feel comfortable and accepting and maybe move forward easier.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
And my pleasure. And I'm glad that you've moved into counseling, so you can still stay in the field. And if somebody wants to find you, how would they do that? Through Facebook?
Through Facebook, yeah. I the lead author of the book, Kelly Doherty, and myself, we have a grief empowerment group, which we just really talk about different topics on grief, and we're there to support each other, kind of like a support group, like an online support group. But then I'm also possibly becoming a grief coach. So that might be in the works in the next couple of months. So I'll definitely let you know if I have a website or anything. But the best place to find me right now is Facebook. You can personally message me and we can go from there.
Well, thank you, Kirby K. And for everybody else, we will see you the next time. Remember that I appreciate you and I want you to make it a great day. It's up to you. Take care. If you liked what you heard on this podcast and want to hear more, please follow us and tell your friends. You can also find me on Facebook at Amy Lindner Lesser, Grief to Growth Life Coaching, and on LinkedIn at Amy Lindner Lesser. Thanks again.